On today's Locked On Jayhawks, biggest disappointments, biggest come-ups, and surprises so far as we're about halfway through Big 12 play.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm Derek Johnson. You can hear me as well Monday through Friday from 3 to 6 p.m. on KLWN's Rock Chalk Sports Talk, at least for the next couple days. Thanks for making Locked On Jayhawks your first listen every day. We are free and available anywhere you get your podcasts, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. And on today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks, we're evaluating KU at about the halfway point of Big 12 play. They just went over halfway point with the K-State game. Biggest come-ups, biggest surprises for KU. What does the path look like to trying to win the Big 12 at this point in time, as they're just 6-4, and looking around the Big 12, which other teams have maybe had the biggest, surprises or disappointments so far to this point in time. First, this episode of the show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more. New customers today join, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So I think overall, if you were to evaluate KU and say from where you were at the end of non-conference play to where you are now through 10 games in conference play, about at the halfway point, are you better or worse off than where you were? Well, if you look at it from a record perspective, you were 12-1 through non-conference. You were one of the top 3 teams in the country in the AP poll. Now you're 4th, but that will probably drop after the Kansas State game. And now, obviously, you've lost, 4 of your last 10 games. That's lower, but also the schedule is tougher. You are bound to lose more games than you lost in the non-con when you're playing UMKC and Missouri and Wichita State and North Carolina Central and some of these schools, right? Now, if you look at the KenPom rating for Kansas, so after their Wichita State win, which was their last non-conference win, they were 15th in the country on KenPom. Right now, they're 14th. So they're about in line with where they've been. And I think on some hands, you could argue that they're better off, right? Like when you see them beat Houston, that gives you just that other good win. But then you keep seeing them lose on the road to lesser teams, a lot of non-NCAA tournament teams, and that makes them worse. I think when you're looking at this from some other things like individuals or things they're doing better or worse, I think one of the biggest come-ups they've had, though, has to be Johnny Furphy. And that's why you could make the argument that even though they've lost some of these games, that the arrow is pointed forward or pointed up overall for KU. In Big 12 only play, and this even includes, there was the TCU game, UCF game. So this even includes 2 games where Johnny Furphy was coming off the bench. But overall in Big 12 play, Johnny Furphy is averaging 11.8 points per game, 5.9 rebounds per game, 1.2 assists per game. He's shooting 56% from the floor, 44% from three-point range. And you compare that with the production you were getting from Marco Jackson, which was typically around, even when he was a starter, maybe 4, 5, 6 points per game, 1 or 2 assists per game, 1 or 2 rebounds per game. It's night and day, not as nearly as much efficiency in what you've been able to get there. And so Johnny Furphy has gone from being this solid bench player to now this stud starter. And up until the Kansas State game, I mean, that 2-week stretch, you could argue he'd been, maybe even KU's best starter, because Kevin's had a couple up and down games in there. And I don't know. Yeah, you could make that argument, even though I don't necessarily know that I would. But still, the point being, he has played really good basketball. And that's been a huge come up for him, enough so that people are talking about, could he be an NBA draft pick as soon as this year in the 2024 NBA draft? And the impact that he has made on this KU team. And I think that's the other biggest come up so far in Big 12 plays. We're halfway through. His impact on the team and specifically on the offense. So since he's been a starter, which is January 13th, he started that first game against Oklahoma in Allen Fieldhouse. Kansas wins by 12 points. During that span with him as a starter, Kansas's record is 5-3. So it's not like the record jumps off the page, but you also take into account it's Big 12 play. Things are very difficult. You've lost a couple tough games on the road, and you've won some big games. Since Johnny Furphy's been a starter, these are the updated numbers. On Bart Torvik, Kansas is the number 5 team overall in the country. 1 during that same span, 1 is Connecticut, 2 is Purdue, 3 is Houston, 4 is St. Mary's, and 5 is Kansas. And when you look at the offensive side of the ball, Kansas, since Johnny Furphy has become a starter, has the number 4 offense in the country. Number 1's Purdue, number 2 is Kentucky, but their defense is in that span in the 200s. Marquette is 3, and then Kansas is 4. And during that span, Among the top 8 offenses since Furphy has become a starter, Alabama's 6, Bradley's 7, or I'm sorry, Alabama's 5, Bradley's 6, BYU's 7, and Northwestern is 8. There's only 2 that have top 35 defenses during that span too, Purdue and Kansas. So you talk about the impact that Furphy has had. He has, you could almost say, saved the season. Like if Elmarko was still the starter and you weren't getting much there from Elmarko Jackson still, like maybe you lose another one of these games. Maybe you lose at home to Cincinnati. Maybe you do lose the Houston game. I know you won by 13, so it's hard to be like, well, does one change switch that? I don't know. Furphy was pretty impactful in that game, right? Maybe that is the difference there. But it's more than that. It's that with Furphy, even though you have stumbled a few times and some of them have just been, okay, the other team is really hot. Some of them have been, you played bad or whatever it is. It's because of Furphy that I feel better where this team is at and where they're going for the NCAA tournament. And so if Elmarko was still going as a starter and you didn't have this come up from Furphy, maybe it would be talking more right now that, yeah, this has been a struggle for them right now, and that might be indicative of what could happen in the NCAA tournament too, where I feel a little bit better about that because of his level of play. I think low-key, KJ Adams has seen his level of play jump up pretty noticeably in Big 12 play. So on the season, he is averaging 12.7 points per game. In Big 12 play, it's up to 13.3. His rebounds on the season, 4.6. Big 12 play, it's up to 5.1. Assists per game, 3.5 per game. In Big 12 play, it's up to 3.7. Field goal percentage for KJ, 63% on the year. It's up to 65% in conference play. And free throw percentage up from 60.5% on the season to 71.4% in conference-only games. KJ has, it's not as noticeable of a jump, as big of a jump as Johnny Furphy went from being a bench player to being this, stud starter now. But KJ has incrementally improved in really every category so far in Big 12 play. Just feels like every month, like he just gets better and better at basketball. And this goes back to, even when he first came in at Kansas. Biggest disappointments, though, so far from when league play started to where we are now about at the halfway point. Somehow, the bench has seemingly gotten worse. Now, there have been a few nice plays or stretches or maybe a few moments here from maybe specific games. Furphy came off the bench and played well early against UCF. When he was still coming off the bench. You look at the blowouts he had against Oklahoma State, that gave the bench a little bit longer leash to work with. The Houston game, you had a few nice moments. The Elmarko offensive rebound and putback, Parker Brown hits the 3. But for the most part, those have been far and few between. And overall in Big 12 play, Kansas has gotten 339 minutes from a combination of Parker Brown, Elmarko Jackson, Jamari McDowell, and Nick Timberlake. And yes, that does include the 3 games that Elmarko Jackson started in conference play. So, because you're looking at the one that you had without Kevin McCullough that he started, and then the 2 that he started before Johnny Furphy. So it does skew the numbers a little bit, that this isn't just me purely saying these are the bench numbers, but those 4 guys consist of what your bench is now. And total it all up between those 4, that's 339 minutes played. It's about 34 minutes per game, 73 points scored, 7.3 points per game on 26 of 65 shooting and 9 of 30 from 3. So that basically means if you collected all 4 of KU, what now is their bench players with Elmarko Jackson, Nick Timberlake, Parker Brown, and Jamari McDowell, and turned them into one player. So far in Big 12 play, on average, that one player is playing 34 minutes per game. They're only getting 7.3 points per game on 40% shooting and 30% from 3. It feels like the numbers have dropped off even more from where you were in non-conference play, and it hasn't started to get better. You haven't seen, Furphy, we've seen that curve arc go up and him start to break out. Haven't seen that with Nick Timberlake. Haven't seen that with Elmarko Jackson. I honestly am at a point where I'm legitimately just give Michael Jankovic 5 minutes a game. Hope he hits a 3 or 2. I don't know. I know the defense isn't good, but it's got to be more than you're getting now. The other one is Hunter Dickinson's 3-point shooting has certainly been a disappointment so far in Big 12 play in the first half. He's still at 35.4% overall, but he's only at 17.4% in league play. I still think he's a good shooter. He's shooting 58% on mid-range shots in Big 12 play. The shots are going to eventually fall. Like the K-State ones, they were halfway down. They just popped out. Keep shooting. I think they'll fall long, but KU needs him to start hitting those shots because they're not a team that hits a lot of threes. They need to find ways to kind of manufacture that. The last one here is the biggest disappointment is the road struggles because entering into conference play, they only had one true road game, and it was a game that they were behind for a lot of it, and they struggled more than they probably should have. Now looking back that Indiana is only ranked 96th on KenPom, but they found a way to win on the road. So it was like, okay, they at least gritted a way to win. in a way that I was kind of talking about earlier. Like, that is what Bill Self teams do. When they're not playing well or things aren't going well, they grind their way to a win. And that's what happened in the Indiana game. That has not carried over into conference play so far. So that would be one of the other disappointments there. All right, let's continue on for KU with evaluating their path to how can they win the Big 12 at this point in time, as they're sitting at just 6-4 in league play. First, this episode, though, of Locked On Jayhawks is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. You can get your chicken wings, you can get your over-under, you can get who's going to score a touchdown. There's so many ways you can bet with FanDuel. You don't just have to bet on the money line or who's going to cover the spread. Pick Patrick Mahomes to have over rushing yards, same game parlay with Christian McCaffrey to score a touchdown, and use an alt line of Chiefs plus 7.5. Whatever you want to do, you can customize it with FanDuel. And new customers join today, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That is FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. What is KU's path to winning the Big 12? Well, at this point in time, Ken Palm's only projecting Kansas to win 4 more games and finish it 10-8 in conference play, with Houston at 13-5. So you got to make up 3 games there. Now, Iowa State gets a big win at Texas last night, and they nearly beat one at Baylor. If they had won that game at Baylor, they'd be in the prime seat right now in winning the conference with back-to-back tough road wins and everything. So Iowa State, I think, is in a good position when you look at their final remaining schedule. They're sitting at 6-3 versus TCU, at Cincinnati, versus Texas Tech, at Houston, versus West Virginia, versus Oklahoma, at UCF, versus BYU, at Kansas State. They might only lose 2 more of those, maybe 3 more, so that might get them to 12. You look at Houston's upcoming schedule here, and they're sitting at 7-3 after a blowout win over Oklahoma State last night. They have at Cincinnati, versus Texas, versus Iowa State, at Baylor, versus Cincinnati, at Oklahoma, at UCF, and versus Kansas. They might only lose 2 more of those, maybe 3 at most. So I think you continue to look at the numbers here when you look at some of the other teams at the top and being like, okay, 13-5 wins you the league. 12-6 might be enough to get a share of it. And that's kind of how I'm looking at it right now. If you view it from the standpoint of, these teams were 6-3 at the halfway point before some of them have played their, 10th game so far this week, then you just double it up. That would lead to 12-6, though I think Houston's schedule in the first half was a bit tougher than maybe their second half schedule is. But from the Kansas perspective, it is more just about doing what you need to do. If you finish the year 12-6 in conference play, meaning you would finish 6-2 in league play after starting 6-4, you might not end up winning the league. Maybe Houston goes 13-5, but at least you would feel like, okay, you did your part. You won a good chunk of games. You started playing better in a difficult part of the schedule. And I think that's what's most important at this point in time. I know it's easier to say this when you're not winning the league and when the Big 12 title streak is no longer a thing. And that's absolutely true, right? If they still had a streak going, like, this would become even more of an important thing. But I think the combination of how big the league has gotten, how many good teams there are, the idea that you can still accomplish a lot in the NCAA tournament, that you can still accomplish a lot in the regular season without winning the Big 12, that you can still win a conference tournament that probably means more now. The Big 12 conference tournament probably means more than it does in past years because you don't have the true double round robin, and maybe it is more of a settling the score type of situation in the Big 12 tournament. You look at the unbalanced schedules, like, for instance, Texas Tech, who's in the league title race, although they've dropped 3 straight. They don't have a return trip to Lawrence. Iowa State, who's in the Big 12 title race, they don't have a return trip to Lawrence. Like, you end up with it's no longer the Big 12 where it was double round robin and you get the true league champion at the end. So like I said, it's easier to say this when you're not in first place of the league and the 14 straight is no longer a thing. But I do think it is a little less important to win the Big 12. I'm not saying that you're not trying to win it. Obviously you are. You want to get that ring. And usually if you win the Big 12, the best conference in the country, that means that you're going to be one of the best teams in the country. And that's going to set you up well for most years a good seed and a better path in the NCAA tournament and better locations of where you're playing your games. That's all understandable. And I totally get it. And if you're going to compete for something, if you're going to be in a league, why not win it, right? I'm just saying it does seem to matter a little bit less than some other ones. But for Kansas, I mean, this kind of comes down to, like, you're going to have to handle road environments better. I think if you do want to win the league, it is non-negotiable. You have to go undefeated at home. And You did clear the biggest hurdle to that by beating Houston, but still some other hurdles. Like Baylor on Saturday, they've gotten close to winning in Allen Fieldhouse a couple times lately, and in fact did win in Allen Fieldhouse. What was that, 4 years ago? That that is a hurdle to clear. Versus Texas, that's one I think you should be able to handle. Versus BYU, that's one where BYU shoots so many threes and they shoot them at such a high percentage that if they do come in and I mean, 51% of their field goal attempts are threes, and they get hot from three, maybe that makes them dangerous to come in Allen Fieldhouse and win. I think you should be able to handle Kansas State at home. So those would be the two that I kind of circle. But then on the road, you're at Texas Tech next week on Monday, at Oklahoma the following Saturday, then you're at Baylor at the beginning of March on Saturday, and at Houston. If you go 2-2 on the road to finish, I think that's like I would take that, basically, is what I'm saying, because it's not just 4 road games. It's 4 road games against really good opponents. And that's the biggest problem with them starting 1-4 on the road in Big 12 play, is that a lot of them have been road games outside of Iowa State to bottom half teams in the Big 12, whereas your final 4 road games all come to basically top half of the teams in the Big 12. I guess Oklahoma's kind of in the middle there and in the muck of what you're trying to say. So you have to figure out a way to handle those road environments better. Going to need more consistent offensive and overall rebounding, I would say. Right now, Kansas only ranks 247th in the country in offensive rebounding rate. In Big 12 only games, they are 11th. So that's actually, their percentage has actually dropped about half a percentage point, just a little bit under that in terms of how many they're getting on the offensive side of the ball. But it's been the consistency. Like, they've had some games where they have had good offensive rebounding numbers, and it just hasn't carried over game to game. They have to find a way to make that more consistent. Maybe that's something where the depth comes into play. And, if you had more adept big men and more of an, athletic team that wasn't playing all 35 minutes per game, you'd have more energy to go up and get those rebounds. I don't know. More consistent turnover numbers on both sides, because UCF game, TCU game, Houston game, we've seen bad turnover numbers for KU. We've also seen them have games where they have an inability to force turnovers. That needs to become more consistent moving forward for KU, and certainly would help on the road. I would also say increasing the 3-point volume. Right now, Kansas is 329th in the country in 3-point attempt per field goal attempt. They are last, 14th of 14 in Big 12 only games. I'm not saying they should become a BYU or a team that is shooting a bunch of threes. But, can you go up from shooting 14, 15, 16 a game? Can you get up to 18? Can you get up to 20? Because Kansas has actually shot them at a decent efficiency, especially now that Furphy's in the lineup. 36.6% from 3-point range for Kansas. I think it would actually behoove them to shoot a little bit more from the outside and try to equal out what some of the other teams have done against them from the outside. Now, that means Hunter Dickinson's got to keep shooting and start to see him go in. You continue to need to be aggressive from Kevin and Johnny Furphy. I think DeJuan Harris needs to be even more aggressive. There are times when he's passing up a decent look from 3. Just shoot those, altogether. Timberlake, just come in, just come in firing. If you go 0 for 2 in 2 minutes, I'd rather that happen and then you get pulled because you can't make a shot than you're just not being aggressive enough and you're throwing the ball out of bounds. The schedule, though, is very tough for Kansas. But I think over these next 3 games, versus Baylor, at Texas Tech, at Oklahoma, you go 2-1 in that stretch. I think you're feeling okay about where you could be. So right now, the betting odds, Houston is the favorite. You've got Iowa State there in second, and then Kansas still has kind of a fighter's chance in this if you're a believer that you can get some good odds on that on FanDuel. All right, let's finish up here with some of the other teams across the Big 12 that have maybe been the biggest surprises or disappointments so far midway through conference play. First, this episode of the show is brought to you by Gametime. Buying tickets to your favorite sporting event should not be stressful. With Gametime, they have a fast and easy way for you to buy tickets for all your favorites to sports, music, comedy, and theater near you, with killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, so you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun that you're going to be having. They have the lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, job loss protection, and more. Get exclusive flash deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, and theater. And the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Which Big 12 teams have surprised and disappointed the most? To be clear, how we've been evaluating things is end of non-conference play from where we were at the start of Big 12 play to where we are now at the halfway point. So for instance, if you're looking at the overall from when the season began to where we are now, BYU would still be one of the biggest surprises. But honestly, the fact that they entered into Big 12 play like top 5 in KenPom, and now they're only 4-5. Does that actually lean them toward being disappointment? I don't think so, but I don't have them on either of these lists. I think one of the big surprises has been Texas Tech. I know have lost 3 straight games and 4 of their last 6, but they entered into conference play ranked 36th in KenPom. And the thought was, okay, this could be an NCAA tournament team, like maybe a middling team in the Big 12. And maybe that's kind of where they are now at 5-4. But the way they started Big 12 play, this has been one of the best offenses in the conference, in the country. And I've been pleasantly surprised with what they've done and what Grant McCasland has done. And, they have a home game this Saturday against UCF. So I think that'll be a good opportunity for them to get back on their winning ways. And then they're versus Kansas at Iowa State. They go 1-1 in those two. Maybe you're kind of talking about, okay, they've still – got a puncher's chance in some of this because the schedule is a little bit easier for them, especially down the stretch than some of these other Big 12 teams. They have a stretch where they go at UCF versus Texas, at West Virginia, at Oklahoma State. So maybe an opportunity to kind of rack up wins there. I would say Cincinnati has been one of the better surprises so far in Big 12 play. They had a pretty good non-con, but I didn't know how it would carry over to Big 12 action. And they're sitting at 4-5, which isn't, an above 500 record or anything like that. But you look at the scores of their game. All 5 of their losses. So 1 point to Texas, 3 points to Baylor, 4 points to Oklahoma, 5 points to Kansas, 4 points to West Virginia. They do not lose big scores. I think this is a feisty team. In my money, this is an NCAA tournament team, and I hope they make it. I think UCF would be on the biggest surprise list because you very easily could have seen them finishing bottom 2 in the conference, but they've been feisty enough that they're hanging on to NCAA tournament hopes. I don't know if they'll get there because, somebody has to lose these games in the Big 12, but it's been – I think a much more impressive season for them. They've beaten Oklahoma. They've beaten Texas. They've beaten Kansas. They can compete with some of the big boys in the Big 12. Honestly, you could make the argument as bad as the non-con was where West Virginia, after the non-con finished up, was ranked like 124th in the country on KenPom. The fact that they have 3 Big 12 wins, including over Texas, Kansas, and Cincinnati, all 3 could be NCAA tournament teams. I think Texas might have the weakest resume there. But still, that probably means that I guess they've been a good surprise on one hand, based on where they were before conference play started. As far as the disappointments, could you argue Kansas? They were, one of the preseason favorites. They were one of the conference favorites to win the title. The fact that they're only 6-4, which ties the worst mark with 2 other Bill Self teams through 10 games, does that make them a bit of a disappointment so far? K-State, until they beat Kansas, probably could be classified. They started 4-1, lost 4 straight. But now maybe you wouldn't say that anymore. I think Texas could go up there, especially after last night losing at home to Iowa State. They're just 4-6. They have a really good starting 5 in my estimation, but it hasn't always come together, hasn't always found the bench success. And, they started really slow, 1-3. Then they got things going a little bit, but then that loss to Iowa State last night, losing on your home court, kind of tough. So that would be the other one that I would throw in there. That'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcasts, including on our YouTube page where you can subscribe to the action. We'll be back tomorrow for a KU Baylor preview on LOJ.